The 90s produced a specific kind of thriller that no longer exists. Adult-oriented, mid-budget, psychologically intelligent, institutionally paranoid. The genre ecosystem that made these films possible has essentially collapsed. What remains are the films themselves, and some of them have been sitting in the dark, completely unvisited for 30 years. Two terms need to be precise before we start. Underrated does not simply mean obscure, and it does not simply mean good. A film is underrated here if it was either not given its critical due at the time, or was commercially successful and then culturally forgotten, or was recognized narrowly and has never been properly argued for as genuinely great. Still Holds Up is even more demanding. It eliminates films whose appeal is nostalgia or period flavor. A film that holds up has craft, thematic intelligence, and emotional honesty that work fully for a viewer encountering it cold in 2026, with no emotional attachment to the VHS era. The canonical 90s thrillers, Silence of the Lambs, C7N, The Usual Suspects, Heat, LA, Confidential, are explicitly excluded. Those are the peaks. Everything on this list operates in their shadow. Let's find what got left behind. Number 10. A Simple Plan, 1998. At number 10, the most obviously correct entry on this list, the film any serious thriller fan would immediately validate. Placed here because its case is airtight and it establishes the standard for everything that follows. Sam Raimi, between The Quick and the Dead and The Gift, in the most underappreciated stretch of his career, adapted Scott B. Smith's own novel, with a discipline completely at odds with his earlier visual flamboyance. No fisheye lenses, no ostentatious camera moves. The film is shot with a bleak, flat, wintry restraint that mirrors the moral landscape of rural Minnesota where it is set. Snow is everywhere. The light is gray. The world is cold. Brothers Hank and Jacob Mitchell, along with Jacob's friend Lou, find a crashed plane buried in a snowfield containing $4.4 million in cash. The decision to keep it sets in motion a cascade of irreversible moral compromises, each one small and seemingly necessary, each one making the next one easier. A Simple Plan is a masterclass in escalation, the mechanism by which a fundamentally decent person becomes capable of things they would have found unthinkable 6 months earlier. Billy Bob Thornton's Jacob is one of the decade's greatest performances. A man of limited intelligence and enormous heart who understands the situation's moral dimensions more clearly than his smarter, more articulate brother, precisely because he has fewer defenses against the truth. He was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. He should have won. What most people don't know is how deliberately Raimi suppressed his own instincts to make this film work. Every ostentatious technique he had developed over 15 years was left outside the door. The result is a film that earns every one of its consequences because nothing is ever exaggerated. The horror is entirely internal, and it is more disturbing for it. This should be in the conversation with Fargo and Blood Simple as one of the great American neo-noir films of the decade. It is not. That is the specific injustice this entry is here to address. Number 9. Arlington Road, 1999. Number 9 was released in July 1999, competed against The Blair Witch Project and The Sixth Sense, made a modest theatrical return, and was then shelved by history. Until September 11, 2001, at which point every claim it had made about domestic terrorism, suburban anonymity, and the limits of institutional security became so obviously correct that revisiting it produced something between admiration and vertigo. Jeff Bridges plays Michael Faraday, a George Washington University professor of terrorism studies whose FBI agent wife was killed in a botched operation 2 years earlier. When his new neighbors, Oliver and Cheryl Lang, played by Tim Robbins and Joan Cusack, the most all-American couple imaginable, begin exhibiting small behavioral inconsistencies, Michael becomes convinced they are not what they appear to be. The film runs 2 parallel tracks simultaneously: Michael's investigation of the Langs, and the audience's constant uncertainty about whether his paranoia is justified or pathological. This structural ambiguity. Is the protagonist right? Or is he a grief-mad obsessive destroying innocent people's lives? Is maintained with genuine discipline for almost the entire runtime. The film refuses to resolve it cheaply. What makes Arlington Road genuinely great is its ending. one of the most audacious and structurally honest conclusions in 1990s American cinema. Unlike most conspiracy thrillers that ultimately vindicate the hero, Arlington Road follows its internal logic to its actual conclusion. In 1999, this ending divided critics. In the post-9/11 world, it became prophetic. In 2026, it feels less like a thriller ending than like a documented observation. What most people don't know is how precisely the film uses Bridges' specific quality, a man whose expertise in recognizing danger makes him both the most qualified person to identify the threat and the least credible person to report it. Knowing something and being believed are entirely different problems. Arlington Road understands this completely. Number 8. The Talented Mr. Ripley, 1999. At number 8, the most commercially successful film on this list, and the one most thoroughly misclassified. The Talented Mr. Ripley is filed in cultural memory as a prestige drama, a sumptuous period piece, an actor's showcase set in beautiful Italy. It is all of those things. It is also one of the most relentlessly, ingeniously tense thriller films of the decade, and that quality is almost never discussed. Tom Ripley, Matt Damon, in the finest performance of his career, is a young man of no background and no money with extraordinary talent for mimicry and adaptation, sent to Italy to retrieve the careless playboy son of a wealthy industrialist. Ripley discovers that pretending to have a life is far easier than actually having one, and that the life Dickie Greenleaf is carelessly wasting is exactly the life Ripley wants for himself. What happens next is murder, identity theft, and a sustained performance of normalcy under conditions of maximum pressure. What Patricia Highsmith understood, and what Anthony Minghella's adaptation brilliantly translates, is that Tom Ripley is not a monster. He is a man of acute social intelligence who simply decided that the rules governing ordinary human life do not apply to him. The horror is not his violence, which is almost incidental. The horror is his competence, his ability to observe, adapt, and survive in environments designed to expose exactly what he is. The film's visual language actively works against its recognition as a thriller. Cinematographer John Seale shoots the Italian coast and Roman apartments with the same golden hour beauty as The English Patient, and this register has led generations of viewers to watch it as a mood film rather than a suspense machine. Rewatch it paying attention only to the mechanics of tension. It is surgically precise. Every scene contains at minimum one thing that could expose Ripley. The audience tracks each exposure risk in real time whether they intend to or not. Number 7. Fallen, 1998. All right, we are moving into films that genre fans will recognize but that haven't received serious advocacy in years. Number 7 is the most conceptually original film on this list. Built on a premise so genuinely unusual, it could not have been made in any other decade. And it has been in active, undeserved neglect since approximately the week it left theaters. Denzel Washington plays Detective John Hobbs, who has just executed serial killer Edgar Reese, watched him die in the gas chamber. Shortly afterward, murders begin occurring in Reese's exact signature. Hobbs discovers the truth. Reese was a vessel for Azazel, a fallen angel who transfers itself between human hosts through touch, able to occupy an entire crowd in seconds by the exchange of a handshake, a brush of the shoulder. The killer is not a person. It is a presence, moving invisibly through the human population, always one contact ahead of anyone trying to catch it. This premise is not a gimmick. It is a genuine mechanism that enables a thriller architecture unlike anything else in the genre. Hobbs can't identify the killer by surveillance or physical evidence because the killer changes bodies between scenes. The investigation has no stable object. That is a completely original problem, and the film uses it fully. Gregory Hoblit, who directed Primal Fear in 1996 and Frequency in 2000, in a remarkable 3-year run of intelligent genre filmmaking, stages the possession sequences with a matter-of-fact casualness that is far more frightening than operatic horror. Azazel transferring through a crowd, accompanied by the Rolling Stones' "Time Is on My Side," which Reese sang in the gas chamber, is one of the decade's most genuinely unsettling images. Washington plays Hobbs at a pitch of controlled competence, encountering, for the first time, something that exists outside the world he knows. It is a model of how to maintain credibility in supernatural material. Find this one. It deserves to be discussed. Number 6. Unlawful Entry, 1992. Number 6 was one of the bigger hits of summer 1992, and is now so thoroughly absent from film discussion that its title produces genuine blank stares among younger audiences. This is a meaningful failure of cultural memory, because it contains one of the decade's great antagonist performances and is a more disturbing film than most people remember. After a break-in at their home, Michael and Karen Carr, Kurt Russell, Madeleine Stowe are helped by Officer Pete Davis, played by Ray Liotta, who becomes a friend, then a fixture, then an obsession. Davis's fixation on Karen escalates from protectiveness to surveillance to active intimidation of Michael, using law enforcement infrastructure. The records check, the casual police visit, the manufactured arrest, to make Michael's life progressively untenable while presenting himself to Karen as the more reasonable man in her life. What the film understands better than its genre peers is the institutional dimension of the threat. Davis is not simply a stalker. He is a stalker with a badge, with access to criminal databases, with legal authority to make arrests on fabricated pretexts, and with a professional community that will extend him significant benefit of the doubt. The violation is systemic as well as personal. The weaponization of institutional authority against a private citizen by someone inside the institution. That is the specific horror this film is exploring, and it is not dated by a single day. Ray Liotta plays Davis not as a maniac, but as a professional, a charmer, a man of apparent community standing who has simply decided he is entitled to what he wants. Affable until affability becomes a threat in itself. It is one of the decade's great villain turns. The film made $55 million domestic. It is never discussed. That is the specific injustice this entry addresses. Top 5. The films from here are the ones most people have not seen, and the reasons they disappeared have nothing to do with their quality. Number 5. The River Wild, 1994. At number 5, the film with the most unexpected casting on this list. And the casting is the key to everything. Meryl Streep plays Gail Hartman, a former professional river guide who takes her estranged husband and young son on a whitewater rafting trip in Montana. Two charming strangers, Kevin Bacon, John C. Reilly, attach themselves to the group, and the charm gradually gives way to something else entirely. Curtis Hanson, who made The Bedroom Window before this and LA Confidential after, directs with the physical intelligence the subject demands. The Montana and Oregon rivers used for filming are genuinely dangerous, and the action sequences have a grounded reality that distinguishes them from studio-manufactured spectacle. The rapids are real. The fear is photographically present. When Streep navigates the Gauntlet, a section of river described explicitly as lethal, the sequence works because you can see the water, and you can see the actor, and the distance between them is very small. Kevin Bacon's Wade is a performance of rare specificity, genuinely charming in the first half, genuinely dangerous in the second, with a gradual transition so precise that the audience is as caught off guard as Streep's character. He understood the role required him to be likable for 90 minutes before the reveal, and he delivers on that completely. What most people don't know is the film's actual argument. It is not principally a thriller about plot logistics. It is about a marriage, about a woman who has been gradually diminished within it, and about how a crisis clarifies what a person actually is. Gail's competence, her knowledge of the river, her physical capability, her practical intelligence, is what saves her family. The film is entirely clear that this competence was always present, just not visible to the people around her. The question, why is Meryl Streep in an action thriller, is the industry's limited framing, not the film's. Streep's specific skills are exactly what this material requires. Number 4. Copycat, 1995. Number 4 arrived 3 months after C7N and was immediately buried by it, which is one of the more unfortunate accidents of release scheduling in 1990s genre history, because the two films have almost nothing in common beyond a serial killer framework, and Copycat deserves to be evaluated on its own considerable terms. Sigourney Weaver plays Dr. Helen Hudson, a criminal psychologist and authority on serial killers who survives an attack by one of her subjects, Harry Connick Jr., in an uncommonly disturbing cameo, and develops severe agoraphobia as a result. When a new killer begins replicating the signatures of famous historical serial killers in sequence, she is the only person capable of profiling him, but doing so requires her to re-engage with a world she has been unable to inhabit for a year. The film's central intelligence is its understanding that trauma does not simply create obstacles, it creates a specific kind of knowledge. Hudson's agoraphobia is the direct product of her professional expertise. She understands exactly what killers are capable of, which is precisely why the world outside her apartment has become genuinely unbearable. Her condition is not a flaw to be overcome. It is the cost of her specific competence. Weaver's performance honors this completely. Holly Hunter as Inspector Monahan is the structural gift the film earns. Where Hudson operates from fear and analysis, Monahan operates from procedural confidence and instinct. A woman who knows everything but can barely leave her apartment, and a woman who can go anywhere but lacks the framework to interpret what she finds. That dynamic is the kind of character writing that separates genuinely crafted thrillers from plot delivery systems. What most people don't know is how precisely the film anticipated a cultural conversation it didn't know it was having. The copycat killer premise, in 1995 a clever genre mechanism, has become genuinely disturbing in a world where real killers actively compete for notoriety. It was ahead of something. Number 3. Blue Steel, 1990. We are in the top 3. The films from here are the genuine deep cuts, the ones that will send viewers directly to a streaming search, and that will pay that search off completely. Number 3 is the entry most likely to produce the response, "I cannot believe this film has been forgotten." And it is simultaneously the clearest evidence that Kathryn Bigelow's pre-Hurt Locker career is one of the most underappreciated bodies of work in American genre filmmaking. Jamie Lee Curtis plays Megan Turner, a rookie NYPD officer who shoots a supermarket robber on her first day on the job. Eugene Hunt, Ron Silver, is a commodity trader who witnessed the shooting, retrieved the robber's gun, and becomes obsessed with her, carving her name into his bullets and beginning a series of killings he then frames her for. The central horror of the film is not the violence. It is the architecture of disbelief, a woman with direct knowledge of the truth in a professional environment, institutionally inclined to doubt her. Bigelow's direction has a fetishistic relationship to the visual language of firearms that functions as a deliberate provocation. The gun in Blue Steel is shot with aesthetic devotion usually reserved for faces, extreme close-ups, slow motion, glinting light, and this visual choice is thematically precise. The film is about the seductiveness of power, about who is socially authorized to carry it, and about what happens when the object of power becomes an instrument of obsession in the hands of someone with no right to it. Ron Silver's Eugene Hunt has been almost entirely lost to history. He plays a man of surface charm and social success whose interior is organized entirely around a grandiosity so absolute it has bypassed pathology into something more like a weather system. He does not believe rules apply to him because he has never encountered meaningful evidence that they do. Silver plays this not as madness, but as entitlement. The effect is genuinely chilling. Place this in the context of Bigelow's full career: Near Dark, Point Break, Strange Days, Zero Dark 30, and you see a filmmaker consistently interrogating the aestheticization of violence and the institutional frameworks that authorize it. Blue Steel is her most directly feminist engagement with these themes. Its relative obscurity compared to Point Break is a genuine critical injustice. Number 2, Pacific Heights, 1990. Number 2 was a solid commercial performer in autumn 1990, made by one of cinema's great directors, and contains one of Michael Keaton's most frightening performances. It has been one of the decade's most completely forgotten mid-budget thrillers for 35 years. There is no good reason for this. It ends now. Matthew Modine and Melanie Griffith play Drake and Patty, a young San Francisco couple who purchase a Victorian house and take on a tenant, Carter Hayes, played by Keaton, to help cover the mortgage. Hayes pays the first month in cash, moves in, and then stops paying anything at all. He exploits the specific legal protections afforded to tenants under California law to make himself essentially impossible to remove while systematically destroying the property, threatening the couple, and escalating his psychological campaign against them. John Schlesinger, the director of Midnight Cowboy, Marathon Man, and Sunday Bloody Sunday, was an unusual choice for a genre thriller, and his distance from the material's conventional requirements is exactly what makes the film work. He shoots the Victorian house with an appreciation for its physical beauty that makes Hayes' destruction of it viscerally painful. He refuses the cathartic violence the audience is being carefully prepared to want. What most people don't know about Pacific Heights is what Michael Keaton does. In 1990, he was coming off Batman, at the peak of his commercial appeal. Carter Hayes required him to be still, cold, and essentially unreadable. A deliberate counter-programming against his public image. Keaton does almost nothing in the film. He occupies space. He smiles at wrong moments. He is polite in situations where politeness is the most threatening possible response. It is one of American cinema's great minimalist villain performances, and almost no one talks about it. The film's housing anxiety, financial overextension, a legal system that cannot protect you from someone who has learned its loopholes, a court that processes your emergency as a routine administrative matter, has become, if anything, more acute in the decades since. Anyone who has navigated a difficult tenancy situation in a major American city will watch this film with a recognition that borders on the traumatic. Number 1. Albino Alligator, 1996. And that brings us to number 1. Kevin Spacey directed exactly one film. It made $1.5 million at the domestic box office, disappeared without trace, and has been so thoroughly absent from the cultural record that even devoted 90s cinema enthusiasts typically have not heard of it. It is, by the standards of the chamber thriller genre it inhabits, a more accomplished piece of filmmaking than work produced by many directors with 10 times the experience. And it contains a cast that, assembled today, would require a budget no studio would currently sanction. 3 small-time criminals botch a robbery and take refuge in an underground New Orleans dive bar called Dino's, inadvertently trapping themselves with a small group of patrons as FBI agents surround the building above. The entire film takes place in approximately 90 minutes of real time, almost entirely within the bar's single interior space. That is the complete premise. The film works entirely on character, pressure, and the mechanics of people in an impossible situation, negotiating with each other about what to do next. Matt Damon plays Dova. This is 1996, between Courage Under Fire and Good Will Hunting, before he was a star fully capable. Gary Sinise plays Milo with a coiled, unpredictable quality that makes every scene he shares with Damon genuinely tense. Viggo Mortensen has a brief appearance, and Faye Dunaway plays Dino, the bar's owner, with something rare and difficult. She plays composure under threat as a form of active authority rather than passive endurance. She is the most interesting character in the film, and she is in it for 40 minutes. Spacey's direction reveals a filmmaker with genuine understanding of what the chamber drama format demands. The requirement to create visual and emotional variety within a space that physically cannot change. He uses the bar's geography, the back room, the bar itself, the front door, the staircase down from street level, with precision. Each location becomes a charged position whose relationship to the situation changes with every scene. For a first-time director working on a limited budget, this spatial intelligence is remarkable. The film's title refers to a hustler's strategy described by one character. An albino alligator surrounded by normal alligators is not the predator. It is the prey, the thing that will be eaten first by its own kind. The 3 criminals are the albino alligator, surrounded, conspicuous, running out of options and time. The metaphor is made explicit but not hammered. The film earns it. There is a moment in Albino Alligator, in the film's final 30 minutes, as the situation reduces itself to its essential terms, where Spacey achieves something that most debut directors never manage. A scene of genuine dramatic consequence that arrives with the weight it has been building toward. rather than the weight the audience has been artificially prepared to feel. Nothing in the film is manufactured. Everything costs something. That is the standard this genre was built on, and it is the standard the 90s thriller, at its best, consistently met. This film made $1.5 million. The films that made $150 million that year are mostly forgotten. Albino Alligator is still here, waiting. Fix that immediately. From number 10 to number 1, what this list proves is that the 90s thriller was consistently doing something the contemporary studio system has largely stopped attempting, making films about internal failures rather than external monsters. The cop who weaponizes his badge, the neighbor who is not who he appears, the legal system that protects the predator as readily as the victim, the institution that processes your emergency as a routine administrative matter. Every film on this list holds up because none of them were making temporary arguments. They were describing something structural, something true in 1990, and true in 1999, and true in 2026. That is what a great thriller actually is. Not a film that frightens you with what might happen, but a film that frightens you with what is already happening. But I know you have opinions. What got left off? Where is the ref? Where is Hard Rain? Should Blue Steel be higher? Should Arlington Road be number 1? Tell me. I read everything. If you made it this far, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel exists for. The next video is coming. And if this list told you anything about how much the 90s buried, that one will take you somewhere you haven't been before.